It's late. You're in bed, phone tilted just slightly so it doesn't fall on your face. You've been scrolling for an hour, maybe more. And now, you're 3 taps deep into a Reddit thread about a guy who drowned in a river 15 years ago. The post is long, the comments are longer. There's a blurry map, some links to old news articles, and one sentence in bold that says, "This is just like the others." That's how it usually starts. Not with a scream, not with flashing lights or a chase or a clue. Just a theory, a pattern, a gut feeling from someone who's done the research. And then it spreads. From one case to 5, to 10, to a whole story about a serial killer hunting college students and leaving smiley faces behind like some kind of breadcrumb trail. Police didn't buy it, not officially. But online, the theory had fans, and Reddit was where they started connecting the dots. This episode isn't just about whether the killer was real, it's about why people needed him to be. Why strangers on the internet started chasing ghosts in riverbanks, and how internet sleuths have mistakenly accused real people, not with solid evidence, but just for being in the wrong thread. It's about vigilante forums, false certainty, and what happens when a true crime story becomes the crime. Because Reddit didn't catch a killer, but they definitely caught something. This is Humans Being Awful, a podcast about true crime, cults, scams, rabbit holes, and all the ways people go too far trying to feel right. This one's about the theory that went viral and the damage it left behind. The only thing scarier than a killer with a plan, it's a bunch of strangers who think they figured it out. Let's get into it. The smiley face killer theory didn't start on Reddit. It started with a few dead college students, found face down in rivers, in different states at different times, but still similar enough that someone saw a pattern. The story goes back to the late 90s and early 2000s. Midwestern cities, cold nights, a string of young men vanish after nights out drinking, only to be found days or weeks later in nearby rivers or lakes. They were mostly in their early 20s, mostly white, athletic, college students, last seen at bars or parties, often just before closing time. And case after case, the police said the same thing. It was an accident. They were drunk and disoriented and walked too close to the water. They slipped, fell, and they drowned. But that explanation didn't sit right with everyone, especially not with two retired NYPD detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. They started collecting cases, more than 40 of them, and what they claimed to find wasn't just a disturbing coincidence. It was a pattern, geographically spread out, but methodically consistent. And they believed it pointed to one thing: a serial killer, or maybe a group of them. According to Gannon and Duarte, these deaths weren't accidents, they were murders. Targeted, orchestrated, and disguised to look random. The killer or killers were abducting these men, killing them elsewhere, and then dumping the bodies in water to wash away evidence. But there was one detail that stuck with people, one image that made the theory feel bigger, scarier, and strangely solvable. A smiley face, spray painted near the sites where some of the bodies were found. Not always close, not always fresh, but just close enough to feel like a clue. That's how the name stuck, the Smiley Face Killer, even though no one had ever seen him, even though there wasn't much physical evidence, even though the cases spanned years, states, and jurisdictions that didn't talk to each other. Because nothing says organized crime ring like a common graffiti symbol from middle school notebooks. Authorities didn't buy it. Most law enforcement agencies rejected the theory outright. They said there was no proof of foul play, that the smiley faces were just coincidental. They are one of the most common tags in graffiti culture, and that if you look hard enough, You will always find a spray painted smile somewhere in a city. But that didn't stop the theory. If anything, it gave it fuel. Because now the people chasing it weren't just solving a mystery, they were going up against the system that refused to see the truth. That's how internet theories tend to work. That becomes part of the evidence, and the less anyone else believes it, the more the believers dig in. So when the smiley face killer theory started spreading online, it wasn't treated like a French idea. It was treated like something that had been ignored for too long, something worth revisiting. And Reddit? Reddit loves a mystery, especially one the cops don't want to solve. And the more ignored people felt by official investigations, the more determined they were to solve it themselves. The smiley face killer theory didn't disappear. It just moved online. Even after most police departments dismissed it, after it dropped out of the headlines, the theory stuck around in the corners of the internet where cold cases go to stay warm. Specifically, Reddit r/unresolved mysteries. If you haven't spent time there, picture this: a constant stream of missing persons, unsolved crimes, and strange disappearances, all getting analyzed by people who are either very smart or very bored, sometimes both. Some users are just curious, some are grieving, some really want to be the person who cracks the case. It's kind of a mix of crime blog, group therapy, and everyone playing detective with Google Docs. And the smiley face killer theory fit right in. People didn't just talk about it, they built on it, started treating it like a real, unsolved mystery that just hadn't been investigated properly. There were full on case files, mapped drownings, color coded timelines, long Reddit threads linking one case to another, sometimes across years and state lines. You'd see things like Case 14, male, 22, found in river near College Town, last seen at bar, 1:10 a.m., unexplained bruising, and then a link to someone else's Medium post that called it identical to four other deaths. The case that really caught people's attention was Dakota James. He was a 23-year-old grad student in Pittsburgh, went out one night in 2017 with friends, was caught on surveillance walking through the city, and then disappeared. 40 days later, his body was found in the Ohio River. Police said it was a drowning, no sign of trauma, no reason to suspect foul play. But on Reddit, the consensus was something was off. The timeline, the condition of the body, the distance it traveled, the lack of details in the autopsy report. People dug in, compared his case to others from Minneapolis, Boston, Chicago, posted theories about how a killer could be using water to hide the evidence, debated smiley face graffiti spot nearby. And once you start believing there's a serial killer, you can connect almost anything. Three pins on a Google map and one deleted comment, and suddenly you've got a murder pattern. A blurry tag on a bridge becomes a clue. A missing timestamp becomes a cover up. A cold case becomes part of a web. That's how the rabbit hole gets deeper. And once you're in, it doesn't feel like a theory anymore. It feels like a case you're helping solve. That's the thing. Reddit wasn't just reacting to this, it was building it, turning tragedy into a puzzle, a crowd project, a mystery you could help fix if you just stayed up one more hour. The posts got longer, the comments got more confident, the theories started looping into each other. Reddit threads turned into blog posts turned into YouTube videos, and before long, Smiley Face Killer was trending again, not because of new evidence, but because the internet decided the story wasn't over. And this wasn't new behavior. Reddit's done this before, but this time, this one didn't blow up overnight. It kind of crept in. It was less about catching the bad guy and more about proving the police had missed something. Because if the official story didn't feel right, Reddit could write a new one. And for a while it worked. People paid attention. They read the threads. They looked at the maps. They got that feeling like maybe they were helping, connecting dots, uncovering something big. But in threads like this, it doesn't take much for suspicion to turn into certainty. People started side eyeing other commenters, reading into usernames, waiting for someone to slip up. Nobody got publicly doxxed or arrested this time, but the vibes shifted from investigation to accusation. So here's where things start to go sideways. Reddit didn't just keep the smiley face killer theory alive, it gave it structure, momentum, and a dedicated, well meaning community of people who really believed they were solving something important. But the flip side of that is what happens when a group of strangers starts feeling a little too confident in their instincts. You didn't need to be a cop. You didn't need access to case files. All you needed was a hunch, a map, maybe some blurry Facebook photos, and a little bit of free time. And for some users, that was enough. They weren't just debating possibilities anymore. They were scanning through other users' post histories, noticing when someone commented a little too much in the threads, wondering why a certain profile seemed vague, why someone's location matched too many map pins. And even if no one said it outright, implication does a lot of the work. People would ask questions like, does anyone else think this guy's behavior is weird? Or why is this user always defending the same cases? It wasn't an accusation, but it was adjacent. And when dozens of people start asking the same vague questions, it doesn't take much for suspicion to harden into certainty. You don't need evidence. You just need enough people willing to connect the dots. Now, no one was doxxed. No one was publicly named. But the speculation didn't stay harmless either. Because this is what happens in online spaces built on mystery. You start needing suspects. And sometimes the person who just posted too much starts looking like one. It's not unique to this case. We've seen it before. Most famously during the Boston Marathon bombing, when Reddit users wrongly identified a missing college student as a suspect. It wasn't done with malice, it was done with confidence. The kind that comes from thinking you see something everyone else missed. But the consequences were real. Sunil Tripathi was innocent. He had nothing to do with it. And by the time people realized that, the damage was already done. The theory might be wrong. The fallout is real anyway. In the Smiley Face Killer discussions, it never got that far, but it came close. You can feel it when you read all threads following the way people talk. That edge of paranoia, that hunger to make the story add up. Because once a theory picks up steam, it starts needing a villain. And online, that villain doesn't need to be guilty. They just have to be close enough. We can chalk it up to internet culture, say it's just what Reddit does, but that's not really fair or honest. Because the truth is, this didn't start with Reddit or with the smiley face killer. There's something deeper going on here, something about the way people respond to uncertainty and why turning it into a story feels better than sitting with it. People love a mystery, but more than that, they love a villain. And more than that, they love the idea that they might be the one to catch them. That's really what's under this whole thing. Not just fear, not just curiosity, but this deeply human need to bring order to something chaotic and to feel like you have the insight that no one else does. It's comforting, way more comforting than the official story, which usually just says, we don't know, or worse, it was just an accident. So people go looking for patterns, for motives, for dots to connect. And when you start thinking like that, everything starts to look like a clue. If you stare at the noise long enough, your brain will find a signal. Psychologists call it apophenia, the tendency to see meaningful connections in random data. It's what makes people see faces in clouds or hidden messages in static, or in this case, murder plots in maps of unrelated drownings. But it's not just about what people see, it's also about what they want. Because being part of a theory like this gives you a role. You're not just reading about a tragedy, you're investigating it, you're helping, you're doing something. And when it feels like the cops aren't, that instinct gets even stronger. Online, this becomes its own kind of performance. You show your research, you write threads, build timelines, link Medium posts, Google Maps, and digital autopsy reports like it's a case you've been assigned. It's not performative in a cynical way. Most of these people genuinely care. They're angry. They want answers. They think someone's getting away with something. And that belief, that certainty, is incredibly motivating. If you really believe there's a killer no one else is looking for, how could you not try to stop them? But there's a cost. Because once a theory takes hold, it's really hard to let it go. Even when the evidence is thin, even when it starts hurting real people, even when the cops do investigate and don't find anything, it still feels like they missed something. Like the truth is still out there if you just keep digging. And on Reddit, that belief doesn't fade. It just waits until the next case comes up, the next drowning, the next mysterious smiley face, the next thread asking if maybe, just maybe, this is all connected. So, yeah, it's not hard to see how people get pulled into this stuff. It scratches a very human itch, the need for answers, the urge to help, the thrill of solving something no one else could. But let's pull back for a second. Even if you understand the psychology, it still doesn't explain why this story stuck, why this theory, with so little hard evidence, lasted almost 2 decades, picked up steam again, and refuses to die. This theory should have faded. Honestly, it had every reason to. The premise was loose, the evidence was thin, the signature, a smiley face, was graffiti level vague, and most of the cases, when reviewed individually, had already been ruled accidental. So why did it hang around? Why did it spread? Part of it is timing. This theory didn't start on Reddit. It started earlier in the mid 2000s, when the news cycle still shaped what people took seriously. When two retired detectives held a press conference and said that they believed dozens of young men had been murdered by a serial killer, or maybe a group of them, and that's all it took. If you want a theory to spread, give it a scary name and a cop behind the mic. The media didn't have to verify the evidence, they just had to repeat the story, and they did. The phrase Smiley Face Killer was creepy. It was simple. It sounded like a horror movie. And even though most of the articles ended with some version of authorities remain unconvinced, the idea was already out there. Then Reddit and YouTube got involved. And once that happened, this thing evolved. Now anyone could weigh in, build a timeline, mark locations on a map, or debate symbolism in the graffiti, watch all the interviews, cross reference names, float theories, and what you ended up with was this massive archive of amateur investigation, like a living document of people trying to make sense of a mystery that maybe was never even real. It stopped being a theory. It became a project. And the smiley face? That was the glue, because it gave the whole thing a visual. It didn't matter that smiley face graffiti is everywhere. It was enough of a pattern, or seemed like one, to make everything feel linked. People weren't just looking at individual cases anymore. They were chasing a story. And once a story is sticky enough, once it has a name, a symbol, and enough content creators behind it, it stops needing facts. It just keeps going. You can kind of see the appeal. A story like this gives you a villain, it gives you a symbol, and it gives you a whole list of unexplained deaths to investigate. Even if they've been explained, even if you're not trained to investigate anything, that didn't stop Reddit, or YouTube, or podcast, or Medium articles. And that's not always a bad thing. Internet sleuths have actually helped solve real cases before. But this wasn't that. This was a case that barely existed. A name with no suspect, a crime with no charges, a trail of evidence built mostly on vibes and Google Maps. But in the age of content, that's often enough. Because there's this strange second life that a theory takes on once it gets picked up online. It's not about the facts anymore. It's about how interesting it feels, how clickable it is, how many episodes it can stretch into. And this one? It had everything: dozens of mysterious deaths, possible law enforcement failure, a recurring symbol, a cryptic name, and just enough internet rabbit holes to keep you scrolling the entire night. It's true crime with a built in conspiracy. That's catnip for the algorithm. And even when mainstream outlets moved on, the story didn't die. It kept resurfacing. Every time a new drowning happened in a big city, someone would pull up the old theory, post them up, circle some graffiti, ask if it looked familiar, and then we'd do it all again. The headlines, the speculation, the threads. Even when nothing connected, even when local police said again and again, we looked into it, it's tragic, but it's not a murder. People didn't believe them. They couldn't, because the story was too compelling now, too sticky, too ready to go viral again. And honestly, that might be the scariest part. This isn't just a story people believed, it's a story people wanted to be true. Because what's more satisfying than randomness? A pattern. What's more compelling than grief? A villain. And what's more viral than tragedy? A theory with a hook. At some point, this wasn't just a weird story anymore. It was content. YouTube videos, podcasts, Reddit threads, TikToks with creepy background music, Medium posts, documentaries, all of it. But sometimes the content doesn't come from Reddit threads or Netflix docs. Sometimes it's just one guy, a TikTok account, and a theory. Like King Wax. Back in 2023, Wax started posting videos about a supposed serial killer targeting men in Austin, Texas. He connected it to the Smiley Face Killer theory and claimed he was working with private investigators. At one point, he even implied the FBI was involved. The videos blew up, his following exploded, and right in the middle of it all, he kept name dropping an app, Foresight, a travel planning startup where, not coincidentally, he worked in marketing. People started noticing. The views were real, the downloads were real, but the story not so much. After a flood of backlash and some serious fact checking, Wax apologized and pulled the content down. Said he got carried away, said he didn't mean for it to go that far. And by then, millions had watched, liked, and maybe even downloaded the app. This wasn't a dark conspiracy. It was a marketing funnel disguised as true crime. And here's the part where we take a breath. Because the damage isn't always dramatic. It's not always the wrong guy arrested or a town living in fear. Sometimes it's just this erosion of trust, of truth, of basic empathy. And the worst part? We usually don't notice until it is too late. What started as a theory from a couple of retired cops had morphed into its own little ecosystem. And here's where it starts to get blurry. Because even if the theory is wrong, the content still works. There's always been overlap between curiosity and entertainment. That's not new. But the internet made it scalable. The smiley face killer stuff wasn't surviving on evidence, it was thriving on clicks. And if it clicks, it sticks. Truth is optional. And look, some creators are careful. They give disclaimers, they walk you through what's confirmed and what's just a theory. They're trying to be responsible. But others? They're not. They dive all the way in, imply there's a pattern, frame every new drowning like it's part of some growing conspiracy, even if the guy just tripped and fell into a canal after bar hopping. And once a story like that starts pulling clicks or ad revenue, Good luck getting rid of it. Because now it's not just a theory, it's product. It gets packaged and posted, played and replayed, cut into shorts, reels, trailers, serious recaps. There's no editor in chief, no fact checker, no real consequences for being wrong, especially if you sound convincing. And the weirdest part? This theory doesn't even have a resolution. There's no suspect, no arrest, no proof, just vibes. But that almost makes it better for content, because it never has to end. It's true crime with infinite lives. The less you know, the longer it lasts. It doesn't take a villain to ruin someone's life. Sometimes it just takes a theory people don't want to let go of. So here's the part we don't like to talk about, because it's one thing to follow a theory, to make a Reddit post, or binge a podcast, or fall down a YouTube rabbit hole. That's pretty harmless, right? Except sometimes it isn't. Sometimes a theory that's based on nothing ends up doing real damage to real people. We're not just talking about misinformation or a few bad guesses. We're talking about people who've been publicly named, even doxxed, based on vibes. No evidence, no charges, no connection, just a gut feeling and some internet sleuthing. There are cases where innocent people have been harassed, had their jobs threatened, had to go offline. Sometimes they weren't even in the same state at the time of the alleged crime. But once the theory picks up steam, no one's waiting for facts. The accusation becomes the headline, the denial becomes the footnote. On Reddit, you're guilty until proven boring. And it's not just individuals, it's families. Imagine you just lost someone, your brother, your son, your friend. You're grieving, trying to make sense of it, and suddenly you're getting tagged in threads claiming it was a serial killer, a cover up, a conspiracy. Even if you don't want that theory out there, even if it's not true, there are real parents who ask people to stop spreading this stuff, beg them not to use their child's death for clicks, and they've been ignored, or worse, accused of being part of the cover up. That's the thing about these stories. Once they get big enough, they stop being about truth or even curiosity. They become about belief, and belief is harder to undo. Because once someone believes a theory explains the world, they will bend every new fact to fit it, or just ignore the facts completely. That's where things get dangerous, because we're not just dealing with weird Reddit threats anymore. We are dealing with real people, grieving people, misidentified people, wrongly accused people, getting hurt in the name of a theory that can't be proven but refuses to die. The damage doesn't wait for the truth to catch up. It happens in real time and it's usually irreversible. There's a reason people fall for stories like this. It's not because they're stupid or mean or just bored. It's because human brains are wired for patterns. We don't like loose ends. And the idea of a serial killer, even a far fetched one, feels more manageable than the alternative, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is that young people sometimes die for no reason, that we don't always get closure, that grief doesn't come with answers, and the truth isn't always satisfying. The smiley face killer theory isn't dangerous because it's scary. It's dangerous because it's comforting. It offers a plot, a villain, a reason to keep digging. It's the kind of theory that feeds on itself. It builds a community, gives people a role, the investigator, the skeptic, the truth seeker. And once that's your identity, it's hard to back down, even when the story starts hurting people, even when there's no story left to tell. This one's probably never going away, even if it's wrong, even if it never made sense to begin with, because it scratches an itch. And as long as there's an itch, someone will keep scratching. You can't debunk a story people need to believe. You can only try to not be part of the damage it leaves behind. Thanks for listening. If this episode made you think or made you uncomfortable, good, that's kind of the point. If you want to hear more stories about the internet, true crime, conspiracy thinking, and the ways people hurt each other in plain sight, hit follow, subscribe, or whatever the app calls it. And if you think someone needs to hear this, send it to them. Not to change their mind, just to show them how messy the truth really is. This was Humans Being Awful. See you next time.